And I think the more that in-country, from your own government, you can get access to grants and support to finance producers through the process, the better.
Terrific. So in terms of what can these trade promotion organizations do? Facilitate multi-stakeholder meetings, awareness raising around the process, and potentially some funding to take them through the process. Paula, if I could ask you, does compliance really cost more, and how perhaps did BRACs overcome this?
I think it really depends. I mean, from BRAC's perspective, it's the way in which they work. So I don't think that from them compliance is a cost. You know, I think for most businesses, they decide whether it's fair trade or global gap. I'd imagine that it's a cost of doing business, and it's a marketing cost. Yeah, I think for BRAC, it's just a way that they do business.
Okay, perfect. And in terms of the second part of the question was around actually getting these, the actual compliance. If you're far away, if you're in the Pacific Islands, how do you think we can bring down those transaction costs? And perhaps that's a question to the whole panel.
If we knew that, we wouldn't be sitting here. No, the reality is that we know that with the South Island states, it's really difficult. We've been looking at this. We have what we call a labelling initiative. In other words, our market-facing construct, which is based in Australia and New Zealand. And there's been a lot of activity there to figure out, well, what could we do for the South Island states? And I have to say, it's really difficult because, as the questioner has indicated, the disparity and geographically dispersed nature of those states does add cost, and it makes it really challenging. Having said that, coming at it from a development perspective, we are having and continue to have discussions with various actors about what we could do with fair trade standards that would be specific to those locations because of their unique characteristics. And this starts to take us into a new space, which is the extent to which we take what is currently a universal standard in the case of fair trade and start to think about how we could be more localized or regionalized about the application. It's not something that we've done so far, but we're certainly very interested in how we might do that.
In terms of the Pacific Islands, in Australia, we've, from a handicraft side, we've actually been working on developing a standard which is like a stepping stone to the World Fair Trade Organization's membership. And we're actually very interested to talk to the Pacific Islands about how they would like to become fair traders of the Pacific Islands, and also New Zealand to do the same thing, and then work together as a collective body in terms of approaching the market. So I think there's things that we're trying to do, but really we have a lot of constraints. Everything we do is voluntary. We don't have any money to do it. So yeah, we're just taking one step at a time.
I think a lot of things, of course, we can benefit with modern technology and the internet. You know, for example, all our standards are available free of charge on the internet, free to download. I think we should use technology as much as we possibly can to break down the sort of distance barriers. I mean, the world is getting smaller, as we know anyway. And I'm sure that, you know, that you've got great products, and great products are always going to find a market anyway. So it's just a question of building the communication and replicating the models globally. I mean, that's what we see. You know, there's nowhere in the world really where this can't be done. Doesn't matter where you are. It's, you know, it's a question of where there's a will, there's a way. And to use technology as well.
And there was one more question around pricing, and specifically to do with organic cotton. And we saw a presentation that talked about standards actually bringing prices up. So, Paula, perhaps with your knowledge on organic cotton, how can we get that price to the end farmer? So there was a question here about in Uganda actually having a higher price for farmers for organic cotton because it's not commercially viable at present. What are some ways in which that can happen? How can we increase some of these prices? Increase the price that the farmer receives for their cotton. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not understanding what exactly your question. So the organic farmer in Uganda who is farming cotton is not getting a high enough price to make it commercially viable. What are some of the ways that the panelists think they can help that farmer?
You mean in terms of working together with other people, a collaboration?
And
or
potentially accessing some certification and markets and so forth.
Well, I wouldn't be someone who's an expert in organic cotton, so I wouldn't feel qualified to talk about that. But I think from certified cotton perspective, you guys do certified cottons, so.
Yeah, I'll pick that up from the point of view of two things. Firstly, the cost of transition. The cost of transition in many commodities, cotton, yes, but also in others such as coffee, cost of transition is relatively high. And of course, typically what happens during transition is that yields can decline. So it's important that there is a market there in the first place. And I think that the problem here is that there isn't enough, despite my points earlier on about consumer demand, there just isn't enough pull demand from consumer markets to create that value add that warrants the transition. So to some or other extent, it's a decision that the producer has to make, either based on value criteria in terms of creating value, or, to my earlier point, values criteria in terms of respect for the land and so on and so forth. Now, you've indicated that you're not selling your tea on organic terms, even though it is organic certified. Many of you may know of a Californian wine company, Bonterra. Every single estate that Bonterra has in California is organically certified, but they sell only a small percentage on organic terms because the consumer demand isn't yet there. Now, the final point about this from a fair trade perspective is that, going back to the coffee example and cotton, actually I've visited a cotton farm in Peru recently where they're in transition to organic, and their trials so far are showing that going organic has a compliance cost in the transition, but what they're seeing now is that their cost of production, because of the reduction in the use of chemicals and fertilizers, the cost of production is going down. So through the use of good agronomy and through the use of imaginative techniques for pest reduction and pest control, they're actually seeing an organic benefit, not from a price premium, but from the point of view of the input costs at farm level. And they're able to do that because they're investing the money that they're making by being fair trade certified on their conventional cotton.
Can I just add to what Rob has said there, really, is that that's our experience entirely as well, is that, you know, many of the producers who didn't want to go into GAP certification at the beginning, but found that they needed to in order to access the markets, now say that they would do it even if there wasn't global GAP there, because, you know, their businesses have become much more efficient in the process. And that, you know, as Rob says, they're actually reducing their inputs, their, you know, workers are better protected, you know, there's a better protection of the environment, there's a more responsible use of resources like water and so on and so forth. So when we talk about prices, we also should look at the other benefits as well. So it's not just about, you know, what is the premium here, it's what are the other benefits, you know, to society, to consumers, and to producers as well. So we need to look at the total mix. It's not just the, you know, the premium, the price premium. So it's very, very important to stress all the benefits and incentives to producers, really.
Terrific. Can we get 2 more questions from the audience? Question right here. And over there.
Good afternoon. Thank you to everyone on the panel. I wonder if we could shift just for a second. We've been talking quite a bit about the producer side, but I wonder if we could now talk about the buyer side. And just to refer back to Rob's graph about the expectations and the theoretical move and price sensitivity to certain certified products, what are we seeing in terms of an actual decision-making gap between what producers say they would, or what buyers say they would do, and what they're doing in reality? Is a 5% cost that we see was, I think, a relatively low percentage. Is that closer to what is happening in the decision-making in reality?
Sure. Yes, perfect. If you could just clarify here, when you say buyers, do you mean the big aggregated buyers, or do you actually mean consumers? B2B. Okay, true.